Tracy, what the hell did you just do to my daughter? David Anderson's voice cracked through the dry Arizona air like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't disbelief. It was something far more dangerous. It was a father breaking. At the edge of the infinity pool, Tracy Baker froze. Her designer heels clicked once on the wet stone, her eyes wide, caught mid-motion, palms still extended toward the water like the act hadn't finished registering in her brain. But the sound of the splash said everything, and so did Lillian. Floating awkwardly in the shallow end, the little girl kicked frantically, one arm wrapped in a soaked bubblegum pink cast. Her lips trembled as her chin dipped under and bobbed back up again. No sound came from her mouth, just a hollow gasp, like silence drowning. David didn't wait for an explanation. He ran. Shoes and all, he launched himself into the pool, the water erupting around him like a detonation. He surfaced fast, arms wide, until he caught her, his daughter, trembling like a leaf in a storm. Her soaked cast thudded against his chest. Her tiny body clung to him. "I've got you," he muttered, breathless. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Can you breathe?" She didn't answer. She never did. Not since her mother, Rachel, died. Not since the world turned so cruel that silence became her only shield. David swam to the steps and carried her out, every part of his body dripping, every muscle vibrating with rage. He turned. Tracy stood there, her expression not of horror, but annoyance, her arms crossed, her voice calm. "She slipped," she said, like that explained everything. "You always told me she liked the water. I was just helping." David stared at her, unmoving. Lillian's breath shivered against his chest. The pink cast, sodden and stained, pressed cold against his skin. "She didn't slip," he said quietly. "You pushed her. She can't scream, Tracy. You know that. She can't call for help." Tracy's smile curled into something brittle. "You're overreacting. She needs to toughen up. That girl walks around this house like a ghost." David stepped closer, his soaked dress shirt clinging to him. "She's a child," he growled. "And you shoved her into a pool with a fractured arm. For what? For not speaking fast enough? For not being the daughter you wanted?" "I'm not a monster," Tracy snapped. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed her by the wrist, just as she had done to Lillian so many times, and shoved her into the pool. The splash echoed across the patio. She surfaced coughing, shrieking, makeup running, hair drenched, expression warped into something feral. "You're insane," she cried. David didn't flinch. "No, I'm a father," he said. "One who finally came home in time." He held Lillian tighter, her face buried in his chest, and turned his back on Tracy. As he walked inside, dripping water across the marble floors, his mind spun with terrifying clarity. The bruises, the silence, the way Lillian had stopped playing piano, the flinches when footsteps came from behind. His gut had been screaming for weeks, but his logic kept whispering, "She's fine. You're imagining things." Until now. He climbed the stairs, took Lillian into his study, and sat her gently in the leather armchair beside the fireplace. She curled up like a comma, clutching the edges of her soaked cast, breathing like she was learning how. "Daddy sees you now," he whispered, kneeling beside her. "And no one will ever hurt you again." Lillian didn't speak, but she looked up at him, and her eyes, those soft, tired eyes, finally flickered with something he hadn't seen in a year. Trust. David reached for the small drawer in his desk. The hidden hard drive was still there, exactly where he'd stashed it 3 weeks ago. He plugged it in, clicked, loaded. First clip, Tracy yanking Lillian by the arm after a glass of juice spilled. Second, Tracy standing over her, snarling, "You think just because you're broken you get to act special?" Third, Tracy shoving the child's stuffed bunny into the fireplace. David's knuckles whitened. This wasn't a woman under stress. This was a woman without mercy. He leaned forward, touched Lillian's hand. "I should have seen it sooner." She didn't speak, but her fingers squeezed his. He picked up the phone, dialed. "Helen," he said, Come to the house. Bring Bradley." "What happened?" his sister asked. "She pushed Lillian into the pool. Her casts soaked. She could have drowned." Silence on the line. Then, "We're coming now." David hung up and stood by the fireplace, soaked, shaking. He looked down at his daughter, who was still watching him, not with fear, but with fragile hope. Outside, the Arizona sky began to fade to gold, the edges of the day slipping into night. But inside the house, a war had just begun. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this video makes you believe kindness comes from the heart. They say your gut always knows. David Anderson just hadn't been listening. Until now. 12 hours ago, he was seated in a glass-walled boardroom in Zurich, nodding through quarterly projections. Now he was dripping wet on the patio of his Scottsdale mansion, his daughter shaking in his arms, and the woman he'd planned to marry clawing wet hair from her face, sputtering excuses. "Tracy," he said again, calmer this time, deadlier. "What? Did you just do?" She stood ankle-deep in water, heels sunk into the pool's ledge, mascara streaking like ink down her cheeks. "I told you," she snapped. She lost her balance. "I tried to help. Don't." The words sliced through her defense. Behind them, Lillian whimpered. Her cast, swollen with pool water, thudded softly against his chest. She clung to him like he was the last solid thing left in her world. Maybe he was. He looked down. 8 years old, barely 40 pounds, silence tucked into every breath she took. She hadn't spoken since Rachel died. Not a word, not even a whisper. But her eyes said it all now. Terror, recognition, relief, and something else, something that made David's chest ache. Hope. He carried her inside, didn't say a word to Tracy, didn't need to. The doors slammed shut behind them, sealing the moment like a vault. In the living room, sunlight filtered through the floor-length windows, catching droplets from his soaked suit. He sat Lillian gently on the cream leather couch and wrapped a towel around her shoulders. She flinched when he touched her wrist. A faint bruise peeked out from under the cast. His stomach turned. "Sweetheart." His voice cracked. She looked at him, silent, steady. No tears, no sound, just a quiet, heartbreaking stillness. David stood, hands trembling, and walked into his private study. Pulled open the drawer beneath the bookshelf. The hard drive was still there. Weeks ago he'd hired a cybersecurity firm to install discrete cameras, unlinked to the main system. The housekeeper had left suddenly. Lillian had started flinching when Tracy entered the room, and once, he caught her throwing away her favorite bunny, the one Rachel had stitched by hand. He hadn't wanted to believe it, so he gathered evidence instead. Now. He clicked play. Footage rolled. Timestamp. 2 weeks ago. Tracy grabbing Lillian's arm, shaking her hard enough to knock her into a chair. Next, Tracy hovering over her in the kitchen. "I'm not your maid. Clean it up. Now, look at me when I'm talking to you." Another, Tracy walking past her in the hallway, muttering, "You're not even his real daughter. You're his pity case." David leaned forward, fists clenched, teeth grinding. And then, yesterday, Tracy pouring a glass of wine, kicking Lillian's sketchpad across the floor. "I'm sick of this moping. Say something or stop pretending to matter." The final clip? Today, the pool, the shove, clear as day. He closed the laptop, walked back into the living room. Tracy stood there now, dry towel around her shoulders, holding a glass of Sauvignon Blanc like it was any other Tuesday. "You gonna explain why you just assaulted your fiancée in front of your daughter?" David didn't respond. Not immediately. He knelt in front of Lillian again. "Do you want her here?" he asked softly. The little girl looked up at him. For a beat, she didn't move. Then, a tiny shake of her head. No sound, but louder than any scream. David rose, turned to Tracy. "You have 10 minutes to pack," he said. "Are you serious?" she scoffed. "You're kicking me out over some edited camera tricks. Please." I've got time-stamped footage, multiple instances, bruises, a child therapist who already flagged your behavior, and an NDA you signed when we moved in. You're bluffing. He took out his phone, pressed a single button. You're being served in the morning, he said. Emergency protective order. And after that, civil litigation. Defamation won't save you. Try going live. I dare you. Tracy stared at him like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. Maybe she didn't. The doorbell rang. He opened it. Helen stood there, his older sister, the one who'd always seen through people like Tracy. Beside her, Bradley, the family lawyer, grayer than before, but sharp-eyed and steady. Helen walked straight past him, gave him a once-over. "You're soaking wet," she said. "She pushed Lillian," David answered, "into the pool, with her arm in a cast." Helen didn't blink. She walked to the couch, knelt beside Lillian, tucked a towel more snugly around her shoulders. "You're safe now, baby," she whispered. "I promise." Lillian didn't move, but her eyes flickered again. Upstairs, suitcases slammed, drawers opened and shut. Tracy was packing. Bradley sat with David at the dining table, reviewing the footage, nodding grimly. "This is enough," he said. "You'll get full protective custody, but she'll fight back. She always does. I'll be ready." "You sure?" David looked over at Lillian. She was drawing now, quietly in the corner. A stick-figure man holding a little girl's hand. He nodded. "I'm sure." The door closed. Tracy was gone. But the storm wasn't. Not yet. The house was quiet. Too quiet. David had always appreciated silence, the kind that came with double-insulated walls and million-dollar views, but tonight it sat heavy, like smoke after fire. Lillian was curled up on the couch, still wrapped in the towel, her tiny fingers gripping the edge like a lifeline. Her soaked cast had been replaced with dry padding. Helen, ever practical, had handled it without flinching, but the bruises underneath, those spoke louder than the waterlogged plaster ever could. David stood at the edge of the room watching his daughter breathe. Even her stillness felt fragile, like if he blinked, she might shatter. He hadn't left her side in hours. Helen walked in from the kitchen, holding a steaming mug. "Chamomile?" she said softly, handing it to him. "For you, not her. She won't touch it yet." "Thanks," David replied, voice rough. "She eat?" Helen shook her head. "Wouldn't even look at the sandwich I made, just sat there, watching the window." David stared down into the tea. Steam rose slowly, almost thoughtfully. "I should have known," he muttered. "You did," Helen said, sitting across from him. "Not in time, but you knew. That's why you planted the cameras." He exhaled, long, regret-filled. "She was pulling away from me," he admitted. "Stopped asking to be tucked in. Would freeze when Tracy called her name. I blamed stress, grief. Thought maybe she just needed space." "No," Helen replied. "She needed safety. And now she has it." David looked up. "Does she, though?" Across the room, Lillian turned a page in her sketchbook. No reaction, no sign that she heard. But her grip on the crayon tightened. Bradley returned with a thick folder in hand. "Protective orders in motion," he announced. "I've got a judge on standby to sign it by morning." "Good," David said. "Make sure Tracy's name never touches legal guardianship again." Bradley nodded. "She'll push back, probably go public." "Let her," Helen said flatly. "We've got timestamps, footage, testimony, medical reports, and the truth," David added. Still, he knew what was coming. Headlines, hashtags, leaks. The internet loved a scandal, and Tracy had the kind of face that played well on screens. David had built empires off press cycles. He knew how quickly sympathy could be spun. But this time, it wasn't about brand damage, it was about Lillian. He rose and walked to her. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently, kneeling. "Can I sit?" She didn't look up but slid slightly to one side. It was all the permission he needed. He sat beside her, quiet, careful. She was drawing a sunflower now, simple golden petals, a brown center, small green stem. "You like those?" he asked. She gave the faintest nod. Your mom did too, he said. She planted some the summer before you were born, said they were little soldiers of joy. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded photo. Rachel, barefoot in the garden, sunflowers towering behind her. Lillian was just a baby in her arms. He passed the photo over. Lillian's eyes widened just slightly. She reached out, touched the image. David smiled. She'd be proud of you, you know. So proud. Her shoulders shook, just once. Then, slowly, she leaned into him. Night fell. David stayed on the couch beside her, suit still damp, hair uncombed, phone ignored. He couldn't shake the feeling, not guilt exactly, something deeper. Like he'd missed the single most important detail in the blueprint of his own life. He had built skyscrapers, negotiated billion-dollar mergers, knew how to read markets before they shifted, but he hadn't seen the fear behind his daughter's silence. Not until today. The next morning, the desert sky stretched pale and wide. A nurse from the pediatric orthopedic clinic confirmed a walk-in slot for a recast. Helen offered to drive, but David insisted. He didn't want to miss another second. They walked into the clinic, hand in hand. Her grip, small but steady, felt like the beginning of something. Maybe healing, maybe forgiveness, maybe both. Inside, the technician removed the soaked cast with clinical precision. David noticed the man's brow furrow at the bruising. He said nothing, but the silence was full. Dr. Krieger entered a few minutes later, warm, professional, but his tone dropped as he examined Lillian's arm. This wasn't wrapped properly, he said. The skin's irritated and there are contusions here that suggest direct pressure, not a fall. David didn't blink. We know. Is she safe now? She is, David replied. Krieger nodded. Good, because this kind of injury paired with mutism, especially selective, requires stability, trust. She'll heal, but not alone. David looked over at Lillian. She was still, but not frozen, watching, listening. When they left the clinic, the wind had picked up. David knelt outside the car, looking her in the eyes. You're not alone anymore, he said. You never have to be. She didn't smile, but she reached for his hand again. Back home, Helen had made pancakes. David sat beside Lillian at the table, cutting hers into tiny squares. She picked at them slowly, eyes drifting toward the window. Tracy's gone, he said. She won't come back. Lillian didn't react, but she picked up a red crayon and drew a small heart in the corner of her sunflower sketch. Helen noticed. She's talking, she whispered. David shook his head. Not yet. No, Helen said. She just did. The house didn't feel like his anymore. Not the polished glass doors, not the granite countertops he once bragged about, not the art that lined the walls, hand-picked for aesthetics rather than meaning. It all felt sterile now, like a stage set, except for the little girl upstairs, finally sleeping under 3 layers of blankets and a makeshift canopy of stars stuck to her ceiling, something Rachel had added before cancer took her. David stood in the hallway outside her room, staring at the faded glow-in-the-dark stickers. Half were peeling now, but they still gave off the faintest shimmer. He blinked, then turned back toward his study. Helen and Bradley were already there. She sat cross-legged on the couch, laptop open. He was flipping through the printed stills David had pulled from the hidden camera system. Unfiltered moments, time-stamped and damning. Tracy's face mid-sneer, her hand raised, Lillian flinching, her bunny stuffed animal kicked aside like trash. No audio was needed. The truth screamed in silence. Bradley set the photos down slowly. This isn't borderline, this is abuse, straight up, repeated. She always knew where the main cameras were, David muttered. I thought I was being paranoid. But after Rosa quit out of nowhere, Helen looked up. Rosa said something, didn't she? David nodded. Called me while I was in Zurich. Didn't say much, just said, I hope you're watching. That's all. Bradley leaned forward. Did Rosa sign an NDA when she left? No. I paid her out quietly. She didn't want anything except to leave. Well, Bradley said, grabbing his phone, I'm going to find her. If she'll talk, we have a credible witness. David stared at the paused footage on his screen, Lillian's arm yanked at a cruel angle, a glass of spilled juice still spreading across the hardwood. That was the night Tracy claimed Lillian had fallen. That was the fracture. Later that afternoon, as Helen organized documentation for the court, David returned to the hallway closet, pulled down the fireproof lockbox he rarely touched. Inside, beneath property deeds and investment records, sat a flash drive, one of two. It contained every backup, not just the last week, all of it. He clicked through clip after clip, each more sickening than the last. Tracy berating Lillian for not finishing a salad, slamming a book shut inches from her face, telling her, "You're just like your mother," pathetic and helpless. David's grip on the mouse tightened. Then he stopped scrolling. One clip, hidden in the metadata, dated 2 months ago. Tracy, in the kitchen, glass of wine in hand, phone on speaker. "You don't get it," she said to whoever was on the other line. "He's obsessed with that kid. If I can just get her out of the picture, boarding school, a wellness break, I'll have him wrapped." She laughed. "Lillian's the only thing standing between me and everything." That night David made a call. "Rosa?" A breath on the other end. Then, "Mr. Anderson? Can we meet?" Silence. Then, "Yes, but not at the house." They met at a corner booth in a diner on the edge of town. Rosa looked smaller somehow out of uniform, but her eyes were fierce. David slid a folder across the table. "I should have listened," he said. She didn't touch it. "You're listening now. That's what matters." "Did you see anything?" he asked. "Anything that could help?" "I saw too much," Rosa whispered. "That's why I left. I couldn't protect her." David's voice cracked. "Neither could I." Rosa finally looked down at the folder, opened it. Her jaw clenched at the photos. "She hated that little girl," she said, "would smile when you were home. But the moment your car pulled out of the driveway," she paused. "I found Lillian hiding in the laundry room once. She said it was the only place that didn't feel like a trap." David swallowed hard. "Would you testify?" Rosa nodded. "Anything for that child." The next morning, David stood in the foyer with Helen. Tracy's voice echoed faintly from the guest room upstairs. "I made tea," she called out. "Is Lillian feeling better?" Helen raised an eyebrow. "She's still here." "I wanted to keep it calm for Lillian," David said quietly. "No scenes, not until everything was filed." "You're being too careful," Helen warned. "She's dangerous when cornered." They didn't have to wait long. Tracy descended the stairs in silk and confidence, her smile polished, eyes scanning the room. "Well, look at us," she chirped. "Still tense?" Helen stood like steel beside David. "You need to pack your things." Tracy's smile didn't waver. "Excuse me?" "We have footage," David said. "You hurt my daughter, you gaslit her, lied to me, your time here is over." Tracy's lips parted, then curled. "You're delusional. You think a few camera clips will hold up. She's mute. You have no sound, no context." David stared her down. "I have enough, and I have Rosa." That rattled her. Her face hardened. "You're going to regret this. I'll go public. Say you're unstable. Tell the world you fabricated this, that you're punishing me because I said no to a prenup." "You go ahead," David said, "but every word you say will be followed by a timestamp and a frame number. I built tech companies. You think I don't know how to authenticate digital evidence?" Tracy stormed out of the room. Helen turned to David. "Do it now." He pulled out his phone, dialed. "Bradley, serve the papers." 20 minutes later, Tracy was dragging suitcases down the hall, slamming doors and muttering threats. Lillian was upstairs, unaware or pretending to be. When the front door finally closed behind Tracy, Helen exhaled. "Is it over?" David shook his head. "Not even close." That evening, Lillian came downstairs quietly. In her hand, her sketchbook. She sat at the dining table and flipped to a fresh page. A man, a little girl, and a sunflower between them. No words, just color. David sat beside her, watching every stroke of the crayon. This was how healing began, not in grand statements or sweeping apologies, but in quiet drawings, in the gentle return of trust. If you've ever ignored a whisper from your gut, take this as your sign. Trust it next time. The smallest voices often speak the loudest truths, if we're willing to hear them. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and cinnamon coffee. David sat with one foot tapping against the polished tile floor, the other flat, still, like he couldn't decide whether to run or stay grounded. Lillian was beside him, her small hand wrapped around a fresh plush bunny they'd picked up that morning. Her old one, soaked and stained from the pool, now rested quietly in a memory box. She hadn't said a word, but she hadn't let go of his hand either. That meant something. The orthopedic clinic was quieter than expected for a Friday afternoon. Outside the glass windows, the Arizona sun pressed against the world with a gold so sharp it looked painted on. Inside, everything felt slow and waiting. When the nurse finally stepped out and called, "Lillian Anderson?" Dr. Elena Kim stood quickly, a petite woman in her late 40s with a warm but perceptive gaze, examined Lillian's arm with gentle precision. Her voice was soft, the kind that made kids believe they were safe, even when they weren't sure why they felt afraid. David sat quietly in the corner of the room, watching every movement, not missing a single blink, not anymore. Dr. Kim furrowed her brow as she peeled back the remnants of the waterlogged cast. "This wasn't applied properly," she said. "Who wrapped it the first time?" David exhaled. "Urgent care. A different clinic. Tracy took her. My fiancée." Dr. Kim didn't respond right away. Instead, she pointed to a faint ring of irritation around Lillian's elbow. "See this? The padding was off, too tight here. That bruise near the joint, did they say how it happened?" David hesitated. Then, "They said she fell. Monkey bars." Dr. Kim met his eyes. "That's not a playground bruise," she said. "It's a grip bruise. Adult-sized fingers, and there's more." She rotated Lillian's forearm slightly, revealing shadowed discoloration hidden beneath the edge of the old cast. David felt his stomach turn. "I have video," he said quietly, "from hidden cameras. Footage of, what happened." Dr. Kim nodded once. "Thank you for saying that. A lot of people stay silent, but this little girl, she deserves someone who doesn't flinch." That night, David didn't go back to his office. Instead, he sat in Lillian's room while she colored. No TV, no distractions, just soft music playing in the background and the scratch of crayons across paper. He watched her draw a tall sunflower with a crooked stem. The sun was oversized, smiling, looming in the corner. Something about the way she colored the roots, dark and tangled, felt symbolic. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "does the sunflower remind you of someone?" Lillian didn't answer. She just shaded the petals in yellow and added a small figure at its base, a girl with wide eyes and a purple dress, alone, but standing tall. Meanwhile, the outside world had started spinning. The following morning, Tracy's Instagram story hit 3 million views in under 12 hours. "I just want people to know the truth," she said to the camera, barely holding back crocodile tears. "I loved that child. I treated her like my own. But David's not well. He's been struggling since his wife passed. His paranoia, the cameras. He made us feel unsafe. I tried to hold the family together." In the video, she sat on a cream-colored sofa, designer books perfectly placed behind her, a mug of untouched tea steaming just out of frame. "He's turning his grief into suspicion. I left to protect myself." The comments were already divided. Some called her brave, others weren't buying it, and a few, digging deeper, had already found Lillian's name in old birthday party posts and started asking questions. David sat in the PR office 2 floors above his downtown firm, his phone buzzing non-stop. Across from him, Danielle Cross, a crisis communications expert, tapped a pen against her pad. "This could go either way," she said bluntly. "Public sympathy is a coin toss when a child's involved and the accuser is young, blonde, and camera-savvy." David raised an eyebrow. "You're saying I have to prove my daughter's trauma on social media?" Danielle leaned forward. I'm saying silence will be filled by whatever story gets told first, and she's already telling hers. He thought of Lillian, her quiet strength, her refusal to cry, even when her arm was twisted, even when she sat in freezing water, gasping. She doesn't need the world to see her pain, he said. No, Danielle replied, but they need to see you believe it. Later that night, David stood in his study with Bradley and Helen. The lights were dim. Outside, a desert storm rumbled in the distance. Dry Bradley slid a folder across the desk. Emergency protective order is filed. Effective immediately. She can't come within 100 feet of Lillian. Helen sat back. That's a win. But she'll strike back. Don't think this is over. I know, David said, but I'm done reacting. He opened his laptop and clicked on a file titled Sunlight. It was just a prototype, a concept platform he'd been building quietly over the past few nights. A space for children in therapy and their guardians, encrypted messaging, resource hubs, whistleblower reports, a place to track patterns no one else wanted to see. I'm going to finish this, he said, more to himself than anyone else, and I'm going to name it after her. Upstairs, Lillian sat on her bed, a nightlight glowing beside her. Her new cast was cleaner, lighter. Her bunny had a tiny bandage wrapped around one arm, matching her own. She clutched it gently, then turned as David entered. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her and handed her a paper bag. Inside was a single sunflower, carefully pressed between two sheets of parchment paper. From the garden, he whispered. It's not much, but I thought maybe it could live here now. Lillian took the flower with both hands, cradled it for a long time, and then, for the first time since the pool, since Zurich, since everything, she leaned in, pressed her forehead to his shoulder, and whispered, "Thank you." Some battles are fought with words, others in silence. But the bravest moments often come when no one's watching. If you've ever had to protect someone without a single soul cheering you on, know this: you're not invisible. And you are absolutely not alone. The first sound that morning wasn't the alarm. It was a ping, sharp, insistent, echoing through the penthouse like a drop of cold water on glass. David rolled over, still in yesterday's clothes, and reached for his phone. 140 unread messages. The top headline read, "Billionaire's ex-fiancée speaks out. I was the real victim in that house." Below it, a grainy photo of Tracy, walking barefoot through a luxury spa parking lot, eyes red, hand shielding her face. The caption called her raw and vulnerable, but David had seen that look before. It was the same one she wore when she threw Lillian's plush bunny across the room because it looked dirty. Now the world was looking, and Tracy was writing the script. Downstairs, Helen paced across the living room with her phone pressed tight against her ear. "Yes, I'm aware she's pushing the mental health narrative again. No, there are videos. We've got verified timestamps, that should be enough, unless people have stopped caring about children entirely." She glanced up at David as he entered. "Morning," she muttered, not breaking stride. Tracy's camp just booked her for a podcast tour. She's doing a full sympathy sweep. The tears, the trauma, the controlling billionaire angle. It's all playing like a Lifetime original. David poured himself coffee, black. No sugar, no time for softness today. "She wants war," he said quietly. Helen nodded. "Then give her facts. Loud ones." By noon, Bradley arrived. He dropped 2 manila folders on the dining table with a thud. Motion to block media defamation signed, and a separate injunction to protect Lillian's identity online. He paused. "You're going to need to get ahead of this, David. Truth matters less than velocity right now. The first version of the story people hear, that's what sticks." David didn't blink. "I don't care about the narrative." Bradley tilted his head. "You should. Because Tracy doesn't care who she burns to stay on stage." David glanced at the wall, at the framed photo of Lillian's 3rd birthday. Rachel's handwriting was scribbled on the bottom of the print. "Sunshine makes her stronger." He exhaled slowly. "Then let's shine some light." David called in a favor. Miles Zhang, an old college roommate turned cybersecurity consultant, leaned against the granite countertop, sipping a canned matcha and squinting at a monitor. "You're telling me someone accessed your surveillance drive and wiped just the days where things went sideways?" he asked. David nodded. "Only those days." "Then this wasn't a fluke," Miles said. "This was professional erasure. Someone knew what to look for and how to leave no fingerprints." He tapped a few keys. The screen shifted to code. "Bingo. Look here. Remote IP activity on 3 separate timestamps. Same VPN signature. That's not random. That's calculated." David's jaw tightened. "Did Tracy hire someone?" "Probably," Miles said. "But it gets worse." He pulled up a name, Devon Firth, a freelance digital fixer known for sanitizing influencer reputations. "Hired last month. Full digital cleanup contract." David rubbed his temples. "So she planned this." "She predicted it," Miles corrected, "and built the escape hatch before she ever hit the panic button." Meanwhile, Lillian was doing something remarkable. In the corner of her therapist's office, with a fuzzy weighted blanket wrapped around her like armor, she laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't long. But it was real. Across from her, a golden retriever puppy wagged its tail after successfully completing a puzzle toy. The other child in the room clapped. Lillian smiled. A breakthrough. Her therapist, Dr. Clara Monroe, noted it quietly. Later, she'd tell David, "She's finding little corners of safety. She's testing the world again, one smile at a time." David didn't cry. He rarely did. But when he closed the door that night, he leaned against it for a full minute, just breathing. But hope has a strange way of arriving with complication. That same night, Tracy's attorney filed for supervised visitation. Her claim? "Lillian misses me. She told me so before David poisoned her against me." The legal team laughed at the audacity. David didn't, because deep down, he knew the court didn't always side with logic. It sided with perception. The next morning, as David reviewed case files in his study, an anonymous email dropped into his inbox. No subject line, no signature, just 6 words. "She did it before. Another state." Attached was a PDF, news clippings from North Carolina 6 years ago. The woman in the article looked eerily familiar. Same eyes, same smile, different name. Tiffany Rhodes, accused of endangering a child. No formal charges. The father had withdrawn the case. The child's name? Emery, age 7, broken arm. Fell downstairs. David felt cold. "She's not a first-time offender," he muttered. "She's a pattern." He shared the file with Bradley, who shook his head. "If this is legit and we can verify it, we've got the smoking gun. Judges care about repeated behavior." Helen was already dialing. "I'll find the father, see if he'll talk." David opened his laptop and clicked into the Sunlight Project site. Still barebones, still raw, but now it had purpose. He started writing a section called The Unseen, a place for families to report behavioral warning signs, a platform for patterns to emerge before the harm became irreversible, not just for Lillian, but for every child like her. That night, before Lillian went to sleep, she handed David a drawing. 2 girls standing in front of a window. One held a sunflower. The other wore a cast. Outside the glass, a storm. Inside, light. David didn't ask who the second girl was. He just whispered, "We'll keep her safe too." And for the first time in days, Lillian nodded. The room was painted in soft colors. Pale blue walls, cream curtains. A round rug where tiny fingers traced invisible circles. Lillian sat cross-legged in the middle of it all. A stuffed bear tucked beneath her elbow, and a therapist gently guiding the conversation without needing many words. Dr. Clara Monroe had worked with trauma children for 2 decades, but Lillian was different. She didn't resist. She watched, she listened, she absorbed. And today, for the first time, she spoke. Just 2 words. "That day." Dr. Monroe blinked but didn't push. Instead, she nodded slowly and said, "I remember." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Dense. like two people standing on the edge of a cliff and deciding not to look down. Lillian reached into her lap and pulled out a drawing she'd made, a pool, a pink cast, and a woman with her face scratched out in thick, angry lines. Outside, David waited in the hallway, knees bouncing, hands folded tightly. The moment the door opened, Clara stepped out, her expression unreadable. "She's remembering clearly," she said softly, "and she's beginning to trust that remembering won't break her." David nodded once, his jaw locked tight. "She's stronger than I was at her age," Clara added. David looked at her. "Do you think she'll be okay?" The therapist didn't hesitate. "I think she already is." That night, back home, Lillian was quiet again, but in a different way. Not withdrawn, just observant. She followed David into the kitchen, holding a crayon drawing behind her back. When he knelt beside her, she unfolded it and handed it over. A sunflower, big, yellow, blooming, and beneath it, two stick figures, one tall, one small. They were both smiling. "Is this us?" he asked gently. She nodded once, then placed her hand on his. Her fingers were cold but steady. Across town, Tracy was working her own form of therapy, damage control. Her team had launched a website, a curated photo archive, and a 5-part Instagram live series called Behind the Headlines. In the first video, she sat on a velvet couch, tearfully recounting her experience with a deeply controlling man. "I wasn't allowed to parent," she said. "Everything I did was twisted into something ugly. I loved that child, still do." But as the views climbed into the millions, so did the comments. Not everyone was convinced, especially when a tech-savvy viewer posted a side-by-side comparison, Tracy's old persona as Tiffany Rhodes in North Carolina, and her current identity. The resemblance was uncanny. The question was no longer if she was lying. It was how long she had been. Helen had tracked down the man in the clippings, James Holloway, former EMT, now living quietly in a small Tennessee town. When she called, he didn't answer. But a few hours later, an email arrived. Subject, Emery. Body, "You're not the first person to ask. I've been waiting for someone to." Attached was a statement, dated, notarized, never submitted in court. It detailed a disturbing pattern: emotional cruelty, gaslighting, isolation, and yes, a fall down the stairs that didn't match the story Tracy gave. Emery had broken her arm in 2 places. The hospital records were still archived. James had withdrawn the case after being threatened with a defamation suit. He didn't have the money to fight. David read the email 3 times. Then, he forwarded it to Bradley with one line: "Build the case. Now." The next day, at Lillian's reading center, something unexpected happened. During a small group activity, one of the counselors asked, "What's something you wish grown-ups understood better?" The room fell quiet. Then Lillian raised her hand. Softly, but without hesitation. The counselor nodded, stunned. "Yes, Lillian?" The little girl looked down, then back up. Her voice was small, but it carried. "Sometimes we don't talk, because it's safer to be quiet." That moment didn't go viral. It wasn't caught on video, but it shook the room. Meanwhile, David's focus had narrowed. Every spare moment went into building out the Lillian project. Now more than a concept, he partnered with a legal tech startup to integrate anonymous reporting. Survivor forums were vetted, therapists volunteered time, school counselors contributed guides, and one section grew faster than all the rest. The pattern tracker, where users could flag individuals who used multiple aliases or changed cities repeatedly after abuse allegations. Names began stacking up. One, in particular, showed up in multiple states. Tiffany, Tracy, Tiana, different cities, same eyes. David stared at the screen. She wasn't just unstable, she was methodical. But none of it mattered without the court's acknowledgement. The custody hearing was set for 2 weeks out. Tracy was demanding supervised visits, claiming emotional attachment and maternal bonds. David knew the system could surprise him, but he also knew something else now. He wasn't alone anymore. Helen, Bradley, Clara. And most importantly, Lillian. She was still scared, still healing, but she wasn't silent. That night, she crawled into bed beside him with her teddy bear, curled up, and whispered, "Daddy?" His breath caught. "Yeah, sweetheart. Promise me, you won't forget what I said." David nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I never will." For every child who learned silence was safer, for every parent who missed the signs until it was almost too late, this is your wake-up call. Listen closer, watch longer, and when the quiet finally breaks, believe it. The courthouse smelled like old paper, cold air, and fear no one would name out loud. Lillian sat between David and Helen in the front row, her small body bundled in a navy cardigan, one hand clutching her teddy bear, the other holding a drawing folded into a perfect square. She hadn't spoken all morning, but she didn't look away either. She was ready. David, in a crisp grey suit, kept his hand near hers, close enough to offer comfort, far enough to honor her space. His heart thundered, but his face stayed calm. This wasn't about his nerves. It was about her voice, and what she'd finally chosen to do with it. On the opposite side of the courtroom, Tracy was radiant in white, a designer dress, soft curls, and tear-proof makeup that glistened as she dabbed her cheeks with a silk handkerchief. Her attorney, a silver-haired man with a TV smile, whispered something in her ear. She nodded, eyes shimmering with performance. The room was full. Press quietly lined the back row. A few whispered, wondering if the child would speak. David blocked them out. He focused on Lillian, focused on truth. The judge entered, stern, older but sharp-eyed. This wasn't her first high-profile custody hearing, and it wouldn't be her last. She adjusted her glasses, looked over the files, then said in a measured tone, "Let's proceed." Tracy's lawyer went first. She was more than a fiancée. She was a mother figure. My client acted out of concern for Lillian's safety. What happened that day was not abuse. It was a misinterpreted moment. He clicked a remote. On the screen behind him, a looped video played, just Tracy diving into the pool, lifting Lillian out after she'd fallen. David's jaw tightened. The manipulation was slick, cropped, reframed, but not the full truth. Tracy gave a soft sob for effect. "She was slipping," she said. "I panicked." The attorney added, "It's common for highly intelligent children to fabricate emotions, or even scenarios, especially after a traumatic loss." He gestured toward David. "Her father has refused shared support. He's isolated her. She needs a maternal presence." The courtroom murmured. David didn't flinch, because then it was his turn. Bradley rose like a man unbothered by smoke. He spoke slowly, directly. No parent wants to believe their partner could harm their child, but denial isn't protection. It's negligence. He turned to the judge. "What you're about to see," he said, "is not edited, not manipulated, not dramatized." He clicked his remote. The screen lit up again, this time from David's hidden cameras. Tracy yanking Lillian by her fractured arm. Tracy shoving the stuffed bear into the trash. Tracy calling Lillian his little PR stunt. And finally, the shove into the pool, uncut, undeniable. No sound, no explanation, just the truth. The courtroom was still. Even Tracy's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Then David stood. "I didn't want this to be public, but I want my daughter safe, more than I want peace." He looked at Lillian, and she nodded. That was her signal. She rose. Helen whispered, "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Lillian didn't answer. She walked to the front, teddy bear in one hand, folded drawing in the other. The bailiff gently helped her onto the witness chair. The judge leaned forward. "Lillian, you don't have to speak. But if you'd like to tell us something, you may." Lillian looked down at her lap, then up at her father, then straight at Tracy. Her voice when it came was soft, but it didn't shake. "She said I ruined her life," she whispered. "But she ruined mine first." A collective gasp spread across the courtroom. David's eyes welled, but he didn't move. Lillian unfolded her drawing and held it up. 2 sons, one smiling, one frowning. A caption scrawled in crayon beneath. I chose the warm one. The judge adjusted her glasses, her voice clear and final. This court finds sufficient evidence of emotional and physical abuse. Tracy Baker is hereby denied visitation rights, supervised or otherwise. A permanent no-contact order is granted immediately. A murmur swept the room. Tracy froze, then hissed, "You can't do this. She's just a child. She doesn't understand." "Ah, she understands enough," the judge interrupted. "She understands what it means to be safe." Tracy's hands balled into fists. She turned to David. "This isn't over. I'll fight you in the media. I'll ruin you." David met her eyes. His voice didn't rise. "I was already ruined," he said. "The day I let you near her." Later that afternoon, as they stepped out onto the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed. David didn't speak, but Lillian clutched his hand tightly. And for the first time, she didn't shy from the cameras. Helen leaned in and whispered, "That girl just changed everything." David smiled faintly. "No, she just reminded us what courage looks like." That night, after dinner, Lillian curled up beside David on the couch. They watched old home videos of her mom, Rachel, dancing in the backyard with toddler Lillian wrapped in a pink towel. Lillian giggled softly. David turned to her. "You remember her?" She nodded. "Do you think she'd be proud of you?" She rested her head on his shoulder. "She'd be proud of you too." It started with an email. No subject line, no signature, just 5 words. "She did this to us." David stared at the screen in his home office. Lillian asleep upstairs. The house finally quiet for the first time in weeks. He read it again and again. The email was from a man named Connor Blake, a single father in Texas, a name David didn't recognize, but the words that followed left no room for doubt. 2 years ago, she called herself Samantha. She dated me for 6 months. She said she loved my daughter, until she didn't. David's hands froze on the keyboard. Attached were photos. A little girl, about Lillian's age, with a bruise beneath her eye. A pink stuffed owl crumpled on the floor. "No one believed us," the email said, "but I saw your courtroom video. I saw her, and I know now, it wasn't my daughter's fault." David printed the photos, laid them out on his study desk. Every piece of him wanted to scream, but instead, he picked up the phone. "Bradley," he said, "I need you." The next morning, Bradley arrived with coffee, legal pads, and a look that said, "We're not done yet." David didn't waste time. "She's done this before, under different names, different cities." He pushed the file across the table. "She's not just cruel, she's practiced." Bradley flipped through the printouts. "This is no longer a domestic case," he said. "This is a pattern, a predator with charm and a rotating alias." David nodded. "Which means there are others." Bradley set down his coffee. "Then we need to build something bigger than a court order." 3 weeks later, the Lillian Project was born. It wasn't a press release or a vanity campaign. It was a digital refuge, a secure platform where survivors of silent abuse, emotional, psychological, or otherwise, could share their stories. Anonymously, safely, loudly. David used his name, his resources, and his shame. "Because shame grows in silence," he said during the launch live stream. But sunlight doesn't let anything hide. The site crashed twice that day from traffic. Thousands of messages flooded in. Mothers, teachers, caretakers, even grown children still healing from wounds they never had words for. Meanwhile, Bradley tracked Tracy's paper trail, and what they found was staggering. Tracy, aka Samantha, aka Natalie Fields, aka Tess, had left a string of abruptly ended relationships, sealed family court records, and private NDAs across 4 states. And yet no convictions, just stories that sounded too similar to ignore. David compiled it all. With permission from the families who shared, he had proof, faces, dates, consistency. Now he needed a way to make it undeniable. So when a viral video surfaced, grainy footage of Tracy in a Florida yoga studio berating a child who had interrupted her vibe, David didn't flinch. He shared the full dossier with a trusted journalist at the Phoenix Standard, and when the headline dropped, "Exclusive, the faces behind the abuse, how one woman slipped through the cracks," the story exploded. Cable news picked it up. A national morning show featured the Lillian Project and aired Lillian's courtroom drawing. David declined interviews, but the story was no longer his to tell alone. It belonged to everyone who had once been silenced and was now speaking. One afternoon, as David returned home from the studio, Helen met him at the door. "There's someone here," she said. "For Lillian." He blinked. "For Lillian?" Helen nodded. "It's a girl. 12, maybe. Her mum's with her. They drove 3 hours." Inside, Lillian sat at the kitchen table with a girl named Ava. They weren't talking, just coloring. Ava's drawing was of 2 girls holding hands, and beneath it, in careful block letters, "Thank you for being brave first." That night, after the guests left and Lillian was tucked in, David stood by the window, phone in hand, reading a message from an abuse survivor in Chicago. "You gave me the words. My daughter is safe now." The phone buzzed again. Another message. "We believed you, so we believed our kid." And another. "Because of you, I left." He didn't cry. Not because he didn't feel it, but because the emotion had outgrown tears. It was something deeper now. Responsibility, reckoning, rebirth. A few days later, Lillian walked into David's office, clutching a sheet of paper. "I wrote something," she said. Her voice was stronger now, still soft, but no longer tentative. David turned from his desk. "Can I read it?" she asked. He nodded. She unfolded the page and read. "When someone tells you they're okay, but their eyes don't blink much, check again. When someone says they love you but make you feel small, that's not love. I used to think being quiet made me safe, but it made me invisible. My dad saw me again, and now I see other kids. You are not hard to love. You're just waiting for someone who doesn't look away." David blinked hard. Lillian looked up at him. "Can we post it?" He smiled. "We can frame it." Spring came late that year. The desert, usually dry and sharp, softened under an uncharacteristically gentle April sun. Lillian stood at the edge of the backyard with a trowel in one hand and a sunflower seed packet in the other. The garden was her idea. Not David's, not Helen's, hers. A space of her own, small, sunlit, and growing. He hadn't questioned it when she asked. He just built the raised beds, ordered the best soil, and let her lead. Now she was kneeling, sleeves rolled, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Her pink cast was gone, replaced by a small tan scar and a confidence that didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. David watched from the porch, coffee in hand, eyes soft. Lillian looked up. "You ready?" she asked. He nodded. She pressed the first seed into the dirt, then the next, then another. Row by row, they planted silence into something bright. A week earlier, Lillian had spoken at her new school for the first time. It wasn't dramatic, no spotlight, no mic. Just a reading circle, a weathered copy of Charlotte's Web, and her calm, steady voice saying, "I'll read the next page." The teacher paused. Every kid froze, and Lillian read. Clear, gentle, whole. Later that day, David sat with the principal, who told him what the other students said. "We didn't even know she could talk." "She sounds like a story." David smiled at that. "She is a story," he thought, one still being written. Back in the garden, Lillian wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and pointed toward the final row. "You do this one," she said. David crouched beside her, groaning like an old man just to make her laugh. It worked. He pressed a seed into the soil, covering it carefully. "Think they'll grow?" he asked. Lillian tilted her head. "You watered them." "I did." "You gave them sunlight." "I tried." "Then yes," she said, "they'll grow." Inside, framed on the living room wall, hung her letter from Chapter 8. Beneath it, a new frame was being added, a thank you card from a school in Ohio. Another girl had found her voice. Another father had believed. Lillian's quiet had become a ripple. David stood at the back of the garden, now fully planted, and ran his hand along the cedar fence. He remembered the day Rachel planted lavender in that same spot. She used to hum while she worked. Lillian was just a toddler then, waddling through dirt like it was magic. He remembered how different life had looked, and how far they'd come. He crouched beside Lillian, who was now dusting off her palms. "Think Mum would have liked this?" she asked suddenly. David didn't answer right away. He just looked at the soil, at her hands, at her. "She'd be proud," he said, "of the garden and the girl who made it." Lillian looked down at the seeds. "She always liked yellow." David nodded. "She said sunflowers look like hope." That night, they sat on the porch under string lights. Lillian was sketching in her notebook. David was scrolling through emails, stories from other parents, survivors, teachers. The Sunlight Project now had over 40,000 members. It wasn't just a movement, it was a mirror, showing people the things they didn't want to see but needed to. And through it all, Lillian stayed steady, healing, listening, growing. A few days later, a small package arrived. No return address. Inside, a single Polaroid, a girl standing beside a tree in full bloom, holding a sunflower. On the back, written in blue ink, "Because she found her voice, I found mine." David turned the photo over in his hand, eyes wet. He passed it to Lillian. She held it gently, smiled faintly, and said, "We should plant more." One afternoon after school, Lillian wandered into the study. David was half asleep on the couch, news murmuring quietly in the background. "Dad?" He opened his eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." She sat on the rug, legs crossed. "Do you think people can change?" He sat up slowly, watching her. "I think people can choose better, but only if they want to. Why?" Lillian traced the edge of her sketchpad with her finger. "I used to think Tracy hated me because I was hard to love." David's chest tightened. "But I know that wasn't true," she added. "And maybe she'll never say sorry, but I don't need her to anymore." David nodded. "You don't," he said, "because you're not hard to love. You never were." That evening, David stood in Lillian's doorway, watching her sleep. The room was different now. The shadows no longer crept, the air no longer held weight. Charlie, the old stuffed bunny, still sat on her shelf, faded, repaired, but he was there. Like a reminder. She had survived, not because of him, but because she'd never stopped hoping someone would see her, and when he finally did, she bloomed. The next morning, the first sunflower sprouted, just a sliver of green, small, soft, unassuming, but reaching, always reaching, toward the light. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. At Elevated Heart Stories, we believe that every voice matters, even the quiet ones. If Lillian's journey moved you, if David's awakening gave you hope, or if this story reminded you that love means seeing what others overlook, don't just scroll away. Click subscribe, give this video a like, and tell us where you're watching from. Your story might be the one that helps someone else find the light. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, and keep your heart elevated.